Hi, everybody. This is Lee, and I'm talking about marijuana legalization once again. I did an earlier video where I just said that there are more states that have legalized medical marijuana than have not. I believe we're up to 28 to 29 states total that have legalized the use of marijuana for medical purposes. And then there's states that are considering that with the 2017 legislative session in various states. Those bills are going through, they're under consideration by each state, um, and the legislature will have to decide. And then, if not, if those bills fail, then the voters have a chance to put that on the ballot for 2018. So that number for legalized medical marijuana is going to increase. The trend is towards legalization for medical purposes. And so the moral issue, the mockery, the condemnation is fading away under common sense attitudes towards the use of marijuana or cannabis for treatment of medical symptoms. There's no concrete proof that it actually cures a disease, but it does relieve symptoms of the disease. And so this is what people are trying to do, relieve themselves of these symptoms. And the diseases and the symptoms vary. They include um, symptoms related to cancer, extreme pain, and then nausea associated with getting the treatment for cancer, the radiation. The use of cannabis modifies the nausea that radiation causes. And so cancer patients are one of the beneficiaries of the legalized use of medical marijuana. And then patients with glaucoma, patients who suffer from HIV or have AIDS, and then patients with Parkinson's disease, Michael J. Fox, Janet Reno, various people who have this disease and suffer from the symptoms, the shaking, the inability to control the neurological functions, the hard time people have with speaking. Medical marijuana relieves those symptoms. There's a video that I watched on Jimmy Dore. He's with the Young Turks, and he showed someone suffering from Parkinson's symptoms. They were unable to control their movement, unable to hold a conversation. They took the medical marijuana, I believe, in tablet form, and then they were, you know, like new. I mean, they were able to function. I'm not sure of the time lapse, but it was a very marked difference. I'm going to try to post that link in this description to this video so people can see for themselves the ways in which people with chronic diseases suffer, not only from the disease itself, but from harsh judgment and twisted morality from people who just do not understand and cannot empathize with someone else's pain, that they won't recognize what other people are going through unless and until it happens to them themselves. And so these are people with multiple sclerosis, people who suffer from epilepsy or seizures, and this includes children too. Children who seize and have these seizures due to childhood epilepsy that hopefully they will grow out of. But in the meantime, their lives are constantly at risk from an episode. And then cannabis relieves that. And if you are a parent of such a child, you know the fear that it raises in, you yourself to watch this happen, to know your child is in danger at any time from any trigger, and that pharmaceuticals are available, but they might be out of your price range, or they may cause additional symptoms that you do not want your child to suffer, or they may be addictive, and you don't want to put that burden on your child either. And so cannabis is the alternative. And then also wasting syndrome, Crohn's disease, and then PTSD, the post-traumatic stress syndrome, often suffered by veterans who have been in combat situations, or people who have experienced severe trauma, and then cannabis is used to relieve them of those symptoms associated with that trauma. And there are other, of course, pharmaceuticals that are used to treat PTSD, but the accompanying side effects are just so severe that they increase the trauma. They don't relieve it. And so cannabis is used for that purpose, to relieve the trauma. In vapor form, smoke form, of course, the tablets. It can be available in the liquid form or as a patch. Sometimes it's edible, things like that. So there's various ways that the medicine is delivered. And so it's a matter of viewing it as a medical necessity instead of something funny or cute. This is saving people's lives. It's actually making it possible for them to function in society. And I'm going through this again because I'm going to focus on Utah. I talked about Utah before in the previous video, saying that Utah is probably going to be the next in the group of states, either 2017, if the state legislature allows it to happen or approves it. There will be medical marijuana in Utah. Currently, there's medical and recreational marijuana to the east in Colorado and to the west in Nevada. And then there's medical marijuana to the south in New Mexico and Arizona. And so Utah is surrounded by states that have decriminalized, definitely for medical use. And then two of them have legalized recreational use. And so there's an issue with the revenue that's going outside of Utah to these other states, the sales tax that's being paid in these other states that's not being paid in Utah. That's an issue. And then there's also the issue of a lot of lobbying that's happening in Utah. There are groups that are actually working against the possibility of legalization. And so I'm looking at an article called The Daily Caller. Health group undermines future use of medical marijuana in Utah. This is from January 23rd. The largest advocacy group representing medical professionals in Utah is launching a crusade against medical marijuana. And they're saying that there's no evidence that it has medicinal value, although 29 other states have already decided that there is a value for the use of medical marijuana, and that people in those states are using it for those various, to relieve symptoms of those various conditions that I named earlier. And so the Utah Medical Association is lobbying lawmakers in the state to reject any classification of marijuana as medical in future laws. They claim that there is little scientific research backing up the label. And so there's, efforts to decriminalize or legalize medical use of cannabis. And then there's the medical associations, there's the pharmaceutical companies, there's various people even associated with the private prison industry who are lobbying against decriminalization. And they have their own reasons. One is profit. And so, it's something that you have to look at, for what it is. There's also another article. This is from the Salt Lake Tribune. Weinholz support for medical marijuana bolstered by wife's personal experience. And so this article is from November 4th, and it describes the fact that there was a vote for the governorship in Utah in 2016. There was an incumbent Republican, and then there was a Democratic challenger. Weinholz was the Democratic challenger, and apparently his wife uses marijuana, cannabis, for medical reasons, although it's not legal. She was actually breaking the law, which made her a criminal, and this was discovered during the course of the campaign. And then Weinholz, the candidate for governor, decided to back the issue of legalization for medical use. He did lose his campaign for governor, and maybe that might have been a reason why, or people just like the incumbent and prefer the incumbent in the state of Utah. But the case is interesting. The fact that the wife suffered debilitating pain with her spine. There were a lot of issues. She had back pain, and it was to the point where she had to address it. For various reasons, she chose not to use opioids, and the usual reasons that she didn't want to have an addiction. And so cannabis is what she used illegally. She actually had 2 pounds of cannabis in her excuse me in her home, and the police found it. The reason why they knew or keyed into what she was doing, she actually sent cannabis through the U.S. mail to an address in California, to her address apparently in California, one of their houses, and that was a felony to use the U.S. mail. And then she had in her home in Utah 2 pounds worth, and so that was another felony. And so there were federal charges, and then there were state charges. The federal charges were dropped. She had to look at the state law or deal with the state law, and it was dropped to a misdemeanor charge. And then she paid a fine. She's got to do some community service, and then she's got to keep a clean record for a year. And then her charges will be expunged if she does everything right. And so she gets a second chance. And I say that because there are people in Utah who did not have the benefit of being married to a wealthy candidate for governorship, who did not have that connection in order to have those federal charges dropped against her. For some people would consider that trafficking, to send it through the U.S. Postal Service. And there's been people who were caught with less than 2 ounces that actually face either similar charges or even harsher charges than this wife of a candidate for governorship. And so this is the selective law enforcement that we see. Of course, in general, people feel compassion if it's used for medical purposes. And it was determined by those who investigated that the wife did not intend to traffic, that she did not intend to distribute, that she was indeed using it for medical purposes, and that her husband, though he lived in the same house, didn't know about it. And so some would say that she got off easier than other people would who have been put in a similar situation. The fact that she was connected, she was able to transcend with relatively little or punishment compared to someone else who wasn't as connected. But in general, for these reasons, this is why people want to decriminalize marijuana, that it's just becoming a law that's just becoming increasingly difficult to enforce from a moral point of view. That some people aren't using marijuana just for the sake of using marijuana, that they need it in order to keep a meal down. They need it to stop seizures. They need it to just stop the pain. They need it to stop the nightmares. for various reasons. And so, on this respect, I do hope that just the fact that such a high profile person in Utah facing this situation of needing to relieve medical symptoms without being criminalized, rendered a felon, rendered into a pariah, that people understand that there is a medical use for this, and that it's not something funny or cute, that people are really living miserable lives because they either face chronic pain, or they face addiction, or they just face the knowledge that they cannot come up with the money sufficient to pay for their prescription drugs, that the drugs are so high in price that they can't fill the prescription. And so they have to use alternative methods, which include cannabis in certain states. And so hopefully Utah will view all these situations, even in light of the serious amount of lobbying that's taking place, in order to continue to punish people who are sick or infirm and need help. The help that cannabis can provide them in relieving them of the serious symptoms that they face, and that the pharmaceutical industry and even the private prison industry will be defeated, but either by the state legislature in 2017 or by the people in the state of Utah in 2018. And for those who are on the side of assisting with this effort, even if you yourself are not a cannabis user, that you feel just in case the issue does become an issue for you, that it should be available. That even if you don't care to partake yourself or use this, for whatever reason yourself, that there are people who actually need it in order to survive and live a good life for serious medical reasons, that they require it. That there is more compassion and then more sympathy, more empathy from people who may not face that situation themselves, but can look around and see that there are others in their community that need help, and that they're willing to lend a hand and continue to lobby for this, their state legislatures, or to actually put their signature on the ballot, because you never know, it might be you someday. It might be someone that you actually care about, even if you don't know them as well as you know the people in your family. It might be your next door neighbor or something. But anyway, best wishes for Utah and for common sense legislation in the remaining states of the United States. Good luck.